Joining me now is senior writer for News Corp, Patrick Carlyon. Patrick, let's start with the Gaza visa issue. The latest essential poll for the leftist Guardian publication reveals the more voters are behind Peter Dutton's call to pause visas for Palestinians than are opposed to it. According to this poll, 44% say they back the opposition leader, 30% oppose him, and 26% are undecided. Guardian writers say this result suggests this rhetoric is politically profitable. I'd confidently say the real figure is closer to 70 to 80%, Patrick. This is the essential poll for The Guardian. And I think perhaps some of those undecideds, and it was quite a large number there, would be reluctant to say they support this policy because so much of the left, including members of parliament, have characterised Peter Dutton's position as racist, which is such an awful way and a dishonest way to describe the policy.
Well, when he called for a blanket ban, I think it was Zali Steggall, wasn't it? One of the Teals came out and said, you are racist. And she doubled down on it subsequently. I think what he had to say sort of resonated with a lot of Australians for a very simple reason. Australians are scared. We've seen the protests since October 7. We've seen Jewish people feel unsafe in their own country. It has resonated because people want to know that there are better checks, that these people are being vetted carefully. There's been a big discussion about the fact that perhaps they haven't been vetted as closely as they might have been. Australians want to know what's going on.
And why are we doing this alone? We seem to be the only nation who's gone down this path. When you look at what other countries are taking in people from that region, particularly Gaza. It's just a bizarre decision by Anthony Albanese, and I think it's going to have far-reaching consequences. Now, Treasurer Jim Chalmers has launched another attack against Peter Dutton, accusing the opposition leader of being the most divisive leader of a major party in Australia's modern history. He also told the John Curtin Research Centre on Monday, leadership which is destructive and divisive is not really leadership at all. And that's what we are seeing from Peter Dutton. He divides deliberately, almost pathologically. This is worse than disappointing. It is dangerous. His divisiveness should be disqualifying. Patrick, it seems the Treasurer and the Albanese government in general are, rattled by the polls, the NT result, by the cost of living crisis, the Gaza issue that is ongoing. The one response they seem to have to all this is just to attack Peter Dutton.
It's bizarre, isn't it? I think, did we wake up and find ourselves in an election campaign? Why is he talking about Peter Dutton? He's giving a very important economic speech. There's a lot going on economically at the moment with cost of living, inflation and a dozen other things. I think it shows that the government is actually scared. Why are they talking about Peter Dutton? Why are they trying to call him out? They've been seen to dither and to be distracted on so many levels. And Peter Dutton has actually, whether you agree with his policies or not, had a clarity of vision that is certainly so at odds with the way that the Albanese government seems to handle these very big issues as they come up. So I find it bizarre that he's talking about it.
It is. It's almost like they're in government, but they're pretending they're in opposition. So they're just running a negative campaign against Dutton. But he's not in power, folks. But he did have this to say after this latest attack from Chalmers.
If Australians were doing it so well and the economy was running, as great as Jim Chalmers claims it is, why is he dedicating a speech to me? It seems when you have a look at the Labor Party at the moment, you've got Tony Burke saying, look at me. You've got Bill Shorten saying, look at me. You've now got Jim Chalmers saying, look at me.
It's hard to argue with that. Why are they hyper-focused on him rather than actually their individual portfolios? And we do have a cost of living crisis. It's not a minor thing. It's touching people from all sorts of demographics, and there doesn't seem to be an answer to it.
Look, it just...
in the short term, anyway.
Yeah, look, there's been a dithering quality to this government all the way through, and a distracted quality too. You look at The Voice last year. I mean, people were suffering. They couldn't, petrol was going through the roof, food was going through the roof, and we're debating this sort of notion of having a two-tiered sort of racial society. People got sick of it. And I think Dutton really has recognised that people don't want to be talking about distractions. They want to know how their bills are going to come down. They want to understand what policies are going to be put in place, and policies that have, by implication, been questioned by the RBA in terms of spending and all the rest. They want to know how it's going to get easier, faster.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is part of the problem, isn't it? We were expecting a bunch of interest rate drops this year, and we haven't seen them. Now, a leading barrister has explained why she refused to do acknowledgement of country announcements. We discussed this earlier in the year when this became news, but the woman behind the story has now penned a column for the Australian newspaper today, explaining her decision. She writes, acknowledgements of country are not about showing respect. They are political statements signalling support for a two-tiered system based on race. They have no place in the law, including in our courtrooms, and the average Australian instinctively knows this. A colleague recently told me that when court commenced with an acknowledgement of country, their client immediately felt the judge would take a view against them and lost any notion of receiving a fair trial. This is what happens when the legal system infects itself with politics. Bravo, Lana Kalaris there. And she also points out, Patrick, that the term First Nations, I've talked about this a number of times on this program, the term First Nations in itself is a political term, and it's designed to push the sovereignty was never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land movement.
It's very legalistic language, isn't it? And it's not about the heritage or acknowledging the past or a great history. I think a lot of people suspect it's about throwing forward to notions of treaties and then reparations and that sort of thing. And we've seen the acknowledgement of country just grow in length, as you're talking about, with all these sort of legalistic terms like First Nations. And I think people are sick of hearing it so many times. It is ridiculous. It is sort of tokenistic. But at a much deeper level, it really is sort of setting a scene for a search for treaties and for reparations that average people think, hang on, that's not right.
And I think also sometimes they become very militant depending on who's delivering it. I've heard ones where they talk about we're on stolen land, sovereignty was never ceded. There are ones that are a little bit, but there's also lines that they always say, which have just become like meaningless mantras when you actually break down what he said and you go, why would you say that? Exactly, what does that mean? They don't actually have an answer when you ask someone. It's always interesting when someone insists on doing a acknowledgement of country, just to ask them, what does that line mean? And why is that there, as opposed to perhaps saying this?
I had one that went for 20 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Yes, a couple of years ago. And there was some rustling in the audience at that point.
Oh, I could imagine. Yeah. Now, Victorian Treasurer Tim Pallas has announced another new tax, a short-term short stay accommodation tax, and yet another hit for those mum and dad investors. If you own a short stay investment, if you're listing it on Airbnb or other sites, you're going to be hit with a 7.5% tax. And councils will also be given the power to ban short stay accommodation altogether. This is a bit of a variation from what we were told, because Dan Andrews said that if you're going to have a tax like this, then the council charges would change. But now everyone's taking their share. Well, a share of your money, I should say.
Well, it's a backflip. And it's a symptom of a government that feels so stale and so debt-ridden. They will try on anything and they will go backwards on what they've said just to get more money out of Victorian taxpayers. You sort of got to wonder, why are we paying? Why do we have this record debt? Why do we have to have these measures? I think it was John Howard. It was an internal memo that talked about the Howard government. I think it was 2002, being mean, tricky, and out of touch. This is just another example of the Victorian government and how it plays to the Victorian people at the moment. They're desperate, and they will go to any length just to screw another dollar out of it.
Well, and they're running out of people to screw out of that dollar. It seems to be property taxes is where they go to, and you've also got things like payroll tax. So people who are actually contributing to the economy are being punished. And we've got the biggest state debt in the country, and it's not getting much better. I can understand why Jacinta Allen was heckled in her own electorate yesterday. That was interesting.